In 2010, Nikki Haley was elected the 116th governor of South Carolina. At the time, she was the youngest governor in the country and the first minority female governor in America. She's the only female governor in South Carolina history. During Governor Haley's tenure, South Carolina was a national leader in economic development. Known as the Beast of the Southeast, the state's unemployment rate hit a 15-year low. It saw over $20 billion in new capital investment, and her administration announced new jobs in every county in the state. That's the kind of leadership America needs. As South Carolina's chief executive, she was a vocal supporter of Israel and the first governor in the country to sign anti-BDS legislation. In 2013, her husband Michael, a combat veteran, deployed to Afghanistan, making her the first governor in U.S. history to have their spouse deployed. The people of South Carolina decisively re-elected her in 2014. 2 years later, Time magazine named her 100 most influential people in the world. In 2016, President Donald Trump nominated her as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. In that role, she served as a member of the President's cabinet and on the National Security Council. As ambassador, she ensured the American people saw value for their investment, defended U.S. interests, kept our country safe, and championed human rights. During her time as ambassador, the United States stood with its allies, repeatedly taking a strong and principled stand against the chronic anti-Israel bias at the United Nations. In the UN Security Council, she proudly issued the first American veto in 6 years, defending the United States' sovereign right to move our embassy to Jerusalem. For her work at the UN, Forbes named her one of the world's 100 most powerful women. After serving in the Trump administration, she founded Stand for America and Stand for America PAC. She continues to fight for policies and candidates that ensure America's freedom at home and strength abroad. Her book, With All Due Respect, is a must-read. Nikki Haley has demonstrated by her celebrated service at the United Nations that she is a bold and brilliant leader whose future is unfinished. Would you please make welcome Ambassador Nikki Haley.
Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. God bless you, thank you. Thank you so much and good evening. It's great to be back with my fellow Christians United for Israel. Thank you for coming here from near and far. When I look out across this room, Diana, I know you know, where two or more are gathered in his name, he is there. The Lord is with us and with Israel. I want to thank Pastor Hagee for those warm words and for his decades of work defending Israel. I can't think of anyone in the faith community who's done more for Israel than for you and Diana. In fact, I can't think of many people outside of the faith community who've done as much as the two of you, and we thank you for that. I always tell Pastor Hagee I want to be him when I grow up. This is CUFI's 17th annual Washington Summit. Now, 17 years is a long time in the world of politics, but we aren't here for a political cause. We're here because Israel is a righteous cause. Our Christian faith calls on us to support her, and we will always answer that call. But first, I want to say a few words about another nation that's on our hearts. I'm talking, of course, about Ukraine. What's happening in Ukraine is beyond horrible. Vladimir Putin's war machine is murdering its way through town after town. Soldiers are stealing Ukrainian children from their homes and sending them to Russia. They're killing whole families and burying them in mass graves. The war in Ukraine is a reminder that evil is real, and it needs to be confronted. In the same way that every person of goodwill should take Israel's side, we have a duty to support Ukraine. We should never stop standing for freedom and democracy, and we should always stand strong against tyrants like Russia. Ukraine is no stranger to death and destruction. Not so long ago, that country was at the center of the Holocaust. 1.5 million Ukrainian Jews were murdered in Nazi death camps. What used to be one of the world's biggest Jewish communities is still there, but it's much, much smaller. Now it's at risk of disappearing forever. I recently read a story about a Jewish woman whose family fled the Nazis when she was just a baby. Now she's 82 years old, and she's on the run again. She left Ukraine, maybe for good. So have many Holocaust survivors. And after all they've been through, they deserved peace. Instead, they and their country got forced into war. Of course, what's happening now is not the same as the Holocaust. Lord willing, we'll never see that kind of genocide again. But the war in Ukraine should still cause us to recognize two powerful truths. First, when people have a land to call home, their love and pride of country make it easier to defend themselves from their enemies. The Ukrainian people are inspiring the world. Putin had no clue about the patriotism, the resilience, and the courage they would show. I'm in awe of them, but I'm a little sad too. We used to have that love of country. That used to be us. We used to be willing to do whatever it took to defend our homeland. We need God's help to get that back. The second truth is that Ukrainian Jews now have a home of their own. Israel was reborn so that the Jewish people would never have to be dependent again. And now that 82-year-old Holocaust survivor has another homeland that will welcome her with open arms. Thank God for Israel. Now, there's one more thing we can learn from Ukraine. It's simple. When America is weak, evil reigns. And that bears directly on the safety and security of Israel. We all know why Vladimir Putin launched this war. If America hadn't failed so miserably in Afghanistan, there never would have been a war in Ukraine. Think about it. Putin saw the strongest country in history leave Bagram Air Force Base in the middle of the night without even telling our allies who stood shoulder to shoulder with us for decades. We asked them to be there. Then we ran away. What a message that sent. Putin had to think that Americans wouldn't have the will to stand up to him. That's why Putin made his move. And it's the price we pay for American weakness. And now countless Ukrainians are paying for our mistake with their lives. It's heartbreaking. And it gets worse. Putin wasn't the only one who saw a green light in Afghanistan. So did Kim Jong-un in North Korea. So did Xi Jinping in China. And last but not least, our surrender in Afghanistan was the gift that keeps on giving to Iran. When Kabul fell, the Ayatollahs celebrated. In the same way that Vladimir Putin thought he could attack Ukraine, Iran's leaders now think they can get away with attacking Israel. And the leader of the free world isn't doing anything to change their mind. It pains me to say that Joe Biden continues to fall all over himself to get back into the Iran nuclear deal. He's putting America at risk and Israel too. That's unacceptable. The United States is better than this. The fall of Afghanistan is a wake-up call, but America's still asleep at the wheel. We saw that fact on full display last week when the president traveled to the Middle East. His first stop was Israel. I didn't think it went well. At one point, the president was asked if America would use force to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. Biden hemmed and hawed about the importance of diplomacy. Then he finally said that a military strike was if a military strike was on the table, he would consider it, but only as a last resort would he use strength. That's like the time Biden said Putin could get away with a minor incursion into Ukraine. We see how that worked. That's not how you tell an enemy you're serious. That's not how you convince Iran to back down. And you know who had to point that out? The Israeli Prime Minister. Lapid said a military threat has to be credible. He said it should not be a bluff. But a bluff is exactly what it sounds like right now. It's embarrassing. America should always speak with strength. Clearly, the Prime Minister doesn't believe the President of the United States, and neither does Iran. Our allies don't trust us, and our enemies don't fear us. This is not the America I know. But it gets worse. The President announced that American taxpayers would give more than $300 million to the Palestinians. The money has no conditions, no strings, nothing. The Palestinians can keep stoking hatred of Israel. They can keep paying the families of terrorists, which encourage more suicide bombings. Basically, the Palestinians can use America's money to attack America's ally. It's a disgrace. Worst of all, most of the money is going to a straight-up anti-Semitic pro-terrorist front group. It's called UNRWA. It's one of the worst parts of the United Nations, and that's saying something, believe me. When I was at the United Nations, I convinced President Trump to defund UNRWA. It was a no-brainer. UNRWA promotes the so-called right of return, which is another way of saying it supports rolling back the clock to when Israel didn't exist. It also runs schools that teach young Palestinians to hate Israel with every fiber of their being. Some of their textbooks preach hatred and violence towards Jews. And it even lets Hamas run tunnels under those schools. UNRWA is aiding and abetting terrorism, and now America is aiding and abetting it. Now, I know from experience that there's only one way to deal with this farce. It's the same way I dealt with the so-called UN Human Rights Council. Disassociate with both of them. UNRWA shouldn't get a single cent of American money. After Israel, the president went to Saudi Arabia. And just like in Israel, America looked weak. Biden went to Saudi Arabia to beg for oil. In reality, he needs to beg America's energy producers for forgiveness. Think about what happened. If you're going hat in hand to beg Saudi Arabia to pump more oil, was it smart to insult the country beforehand? If you knew Saudi Arabia was drawing closer to Israel, moving the broader region toward peace, would you spend the better part of 2 years pushing it away? Finally, if you knew Saudi Arabia and America shared a common enemy in Iran, would you say and treat the Saudi ruler like a pariah? The crown prince is in his 30s. He will outlast most leaders in the world. We need to work with him, not insult him. The truth is, Biden has been tougher on Saudi Arabia than he's been on Iran. No wonder the Saudis are turning their backs on America. No wonder they're making friends with Russia and China instead. And no wonder Iran thinks it can get away with murder. The Ayatollah's number one fear is America, Saudi Arabia, and Israel working together. But the incredible collaboration that's been built over 4 years is at risk of falling apart. Due to America's weakness, Iran is in the strongest position it's ever been. Everyone knows what Iran wants. It wants nuclear weapons. It wants ballistic missiles to carry those nuclear weapons. And it wants to use those missiles and nukes to destroy both Israel and America. We know it's true because Iran's rulers say it. Their favorite phrases are death to Israel and death to America. They even write it on their missiles. Let me be clear, the Ayatollahs aren't joking. They're deadly serious. They're making a promise. We should take them at their word. And we have to make sure that they can never keep that promise by getting a nuclear weapon. Sadly, America is unwittingly helping Iran achieve its evil vision. The president is desperate to get back into the Iran nuclear deal. He's made that clear, and he said he'll do almost anything to get the Ayatollahs to sign on the dotted line. That includes giving Iran more than $100 billion with a B dollars. You can bet that money will fund terrorist attacks on Israel and America. It's painfully obvious that the current White House is bad at negotiating. Iran won't even allow America in the negotiating room, and the president went along with it. And do you know who Biden allowed to be our lead negotiator on the Iran deal? Russia. We're letting one enemy negotiate with a second enemy behind closed doors. And we're supposed to believe that whatever they agree on will be good for us or Israel? How naive do you have to be? America is smarter than this. The good news is no deal has been reached. The bad news is that it could happen soon. Negotiations keep going, and America looks willing to give it all away. Iran has already made it clear it has no intention of changing course. It kicked out inspectors and ramped up enrichment. Those aren't the moves of a country that's willing to abandon its nuclear dreams. Even if it signs the deal, mark my words, Iran will keep cheating until it gets what it wants. Anything Joe Biden signs will all but guarantee that Iran gets the bomb. No deal is better than a bad deal. And if this president signs any sort of deal, I'll make you a promise. The next president will shred it on her first day in office. Just saying, sometimes it takes a woman. You know it. If it ever looks like Iran is getting to a nuclear weapon, we must act, and we must act swiftly and decisively. Our national security depends on keeping the bomb away from Iran. And if America won't, then Israel must, and we should help them. At a minimum, we should give Israel everything it needs to defend itself and destroy Iran's nuclear program. It has every right to protect its people, and no one has any right to stand in the way. Israel would be doing the world a favor. These threats are real, and they're serious. But my faith tells me that Israel will survive. Not only that, Israel will thrive as she always does. I strongly believe no one can destroy what God has blessed. And make no mistake, God has blessed Israel. The Lord is calling on us to bless Israel too. She needs our support in this dangerous time, and we need to stop running from our shadow and recover our national strength. America is losing faith in itself. And if we don't regain our confidence and pride, then Israel will suffer. So will the whole world. When I think of what we need to do, a biblical story comes to mind. It's from the book of Numbers, and I'm sure you know it. After Moses and the Israelites were delivered from Egypt, they approached the Promised Land. Moses sent leaders of each of the 12 tribes to find a home for God's people. When they came back, they were filled with self-doubt and pessimism. All but 2 had lost sight of God's goodness. They had forgotten his pledge to deliver them from evil. Ultimately, they were punished for that lack of faith. For the next 40 years, the Israelites were doomed to wander the desert. My friends, America is at risk of making that mistake. But we can choose a better way. We can be like the faithful Joshua and Caleb who returned from the promised land with hopeful reports. We can do as they did and keep the faith. And we can rally our nation to do what's right. The time has come to make America strong and proud once more. Let's do it for our sake and our family's sake. Let's do it for Israel. Modern Israel provides all the inspiration that we need. She was given life by those who walked through the valley of the shadow of death. Our faith compels us to fight the return of that darkness. And in Israel, we see the goodness of God kindled into light. What other country has turned such weakness into strength? What other culture has turned such despair into hope? Who has risen faster or further than Israel and her people? They stand for freedom and peace and the promise of the future. And as Christians, as Americans, we are proud to stand with them. The challenges they face, we will overcome together. And with courage and faith, we will go forward, confident that our work will be rewarded in this life and the next. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless all who stand with Israel and America.